such a pleasure, really an honor to be here and to be up here with such amazing people. I've read Coleman McCarthy's writings for not just years, but decades, and always admired him greatly. And I know he was a friend and a counselor, speechwriter for the founder and the guiding light of the Peace Corps, Sergeant Schreiber. So it's a special honor to have this chance to meet you and be here with all of other colleagues as well. American, of course, is wonderful to host this. It's one of the top Peace Corps volunteer producing schools in the region, and we greatly appreciate you hosting the event. I'd like to also extend to you all and to our fellow panelists the regards of our director, Aaron Williams, who wanted very much to be here today, but departed yesterday for North Africa and Asia, where he's going to be discussing future Peace Corps presence in a number of countries in those regions. And amongst those countries he's traveling to is Tunisia, where Peace Corps left about 16 years ago. And he's going there at the request of the new government of Tunisia, which came to power after the Arab Spring there, which I think is a wonderful testament. While all of us on this panel come from very different experiences and backgrounds, I do think it's clear that we all share one thing, and that is a common belief in and really a love for service and the commitment to spend our own energies trying to support those of you who are seeking opportunities to serve. I have the distinct honor to help Aaron Williams and to work at Peace Corps serving as the Chief of Staff for the last 3 years. It's a dream job for me, especially as a former Peace Corps volunteer, one that I'm proud of every day. But I'm even more proud to call myself a returned Peace Corps volunteer, which is how I began my own career. I served as a volunteer in Bolivia from 1968 to 1970 up on what's called the Altiplano, the high plain, at about 13,000 feet in the Andes. I was working there in community development to help Imani campesinos there deal with a number of things. We built a school, we did a lot of interesting things. But mostly their concern was in solving their immediate agricultural problems and to earn a little bit more income. And as a philosophy major in college, I really had no idea how much I would soon learn about shearing sheep, growing potatoes, and raising chickens, which is how I spent most of my time for those 2 years at 13,000 feet. But more importantly, Peace Corps really did teach me the value of organizing communities and the fact that when communities come together and mobilize for a common purpose, it's really quite extraordinary what can be accomplished. And today, after more than 50 years now from its founding, the Peace Corps continues to be a bridge for American citizens of all ages and all backgrounds to help people and to help communities accomplish great things. One of the things I love the most about my job is when I get to go out, too rarely, to visit volunteers in the field, and I get to see actually the power of service and how service can change lives every day. One of the things we always say at Peace Corps, because it is proven so true, is that the Peace Corps is a life-defining experience, and we have some evidence, which I'll share with you in a minute, about the personal and the professional rewards that Peace Corps service has on our volunteers, which lasts their lifetimes. I know that today there are many opportunities for Americans to work and serve abroad, certainly many more than existed when I was your age. And I also know, however, that few of these can really rise to the level of responsibility and provide the kind of personal confidence and resilience that experience of 2 years or more serving overseas in a developing country can provide. The Peace Corps places volunteers only in countries who request them all around the world. And I think, as most of you are aware, our roots and our mission date back to then Senator John F. Kennedy, who in the presidential campaign of 1960 challenged the students of the University of Michigan to serve their country in the cause of peace and friendship by living and working in a developing country, not for a week and not for a month, but for 2 years or even more. The Peace Corps is a bit unique in the U.S. Government. We're a small federal agency with a modest budget. We make no financial grants overseas. We're committed to a person-to-person exchange of ideas, of culture, languages, of experience, of expertise. Peace Corps requires a firm 2-year commitment to service in a developing country, and we have over 9,000 Americans serving in 75 countries today. We'd like to have even more volunteers serving in more countries, as we did in the 1960s. The demand for volunteers is there. There are really quite a number of countries who have requested volunteers and are waiting for us to respond. And the supply of volunteers is still strong, especially in American universities. But our current modest budget limits further growth at this time. Hopefully that will change in the future. Peace Corps volunteers fill a wide variety of requests from host countries in about half a dozen different program areas, including education. That's the largest area, lots of teachers and teacher trainers, curriculum support people, health and HIV/AIDS, the second largest area, working especially in Africa, but in many other parts of the world as well. Small business development, community development, environment, agriculture, and youth development. The volunteers of the 21st century do differ in significant ways from the volunteers of my generation. They and you are far more technologically savvy than we ever were, far more interconnected. Even from their remote sites, it's astonishing how well connected the Peace Corps volunteers are today. They have their iPhones, they have their iPads, they have their iPods, they text, they email, Skype, they blog, they tweet about their service, and share their experiences with friends and family in ways that I never could have imagined and really barely even understand today. But that's a good thing. They use that technology in many, many positive ways to respond to the needs of their communities. Really, the most important things about Peace Corps service have not changed. The volunteers today are still adventuresome, flexible, they're still well-trained, they're culturally sensitive, they're linguistically skilled, and they're committed deeply to their service. And the core of their experience remains the same as it was, which is a very deep immersion into a different culture where you stay and you live and you work and you laugh, you love, and eat with the people who are your neighbors. And you develop a real insight into what the term severe poverty actually means for more than 1 billion of the world's citizens. This hasn't changed. But people often ask us, are those volunteers out there really accomplishing anything? Do these young Americans really do any good? There are many answers to this question, many of them, perhaps most of them, in the form of stories. So I just want to share one quick story with you. There was a young woman volunteer in Peru in the mid-60s, and she encountered a Peruvian boy on the street in a small coastal port town of Chimbote. The boy's father worked as a common laborer there, and his mother sold fish. His family had come down to Chimbote from the high Andes in Peru, an indigenous family looking for a better life along the seacoast. This volunteer was a young woman named Nancy Deeds, and she was looking for a host family from which to rent a room. And the boy she met on the street urged his parents to rent her a room, and they agreed to do so for the rate of $7 a month. Nancy also discovered quickly that her host mother had given birth to 15 children, 7 of which had died already. Nancy worked as an education volunteer at Chipotle schools and became the young man's mentor, teaching him English and urging him to take a leadership role in the local sports club. She helped him continue his education and stay off the streets by paying his school fees. And because he no longer had to work on the streets, he did well in school and he won a small grant to study at a university. With Nancy's continuing help and encouragement, this boy eventually applied for a scholarship to the United States and was able to enroll in a foreign students program at the University of San Francisco. There he worked at a gas station in the city. He ultimately graduated with good grades and won a Ford Fellowship for graduate study at Stanford University. Went on to complete, amazingly enough, both a master's degree and a doctorate in economics, and then went on to work for the United Nations, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the World Bank. And finally, he returned to Peru. In 2001, this boy, Alejandro Toledo, was elected president of Peru, the first indigenous president ever in his country. Nancy Dees was his guest of honor at his inauguration, and President Toledo quickly led the Peace Corps to return to Peru after 25 years of absence. Today, Peace Corps Peru is one of our largest and strongest programs in Latin America. This story is really not all that unusual. Even today, our director travels around the world, and over the last 3 years, he's traveled across much of Africa, and he's encountered an extraordinary number of African ambassadors, key leaders, ministers, high officials in African governments who have made a point to attribute to him their success in public life, in large part to the Peace Corps volunteers who taught them in their villages when they were growing up. These people include the president of Tanzania and the vice presidents of Liberia and Ghana, among others. So I think it's fair to say that many Peace Corps volunteers have inspired and helped people worldwide to think past their humble origins and beyond the forces of discrimination and social exclusion which they may experience, and to help them break the barriers to their mobility to reach their full potential as leaders and public servants. But even these stories are a little deviation from the theme of today's program of transformative service and leadership provided by former volunteers. What do Peace Corps volunteers do after their 2 or 3 years of service in the developing world? Over the past 50 years, more than 200,000 Americans have served in the Peace Corps. When volunteers return home from their service, they often strive to make a difference, sometimes in international or federal public service, but more often in their states and their local towns and communities. Returned volunteers have excelled in government service, like the almost 24 RPCVs that have gone on to become ambassadors, or former senators like Paul Saunders or Chris Dodd. There have also been governors like Governor Robert Taft of Ohio or Jim Doyle in Wisconsin. And today, there are 4 congressmen serving in the House of Representatives. But rather than talking about specific return volunteers, let me just quickly show you a few of the results of a recent and remarkable comprehensive survey carried out by the NGO Civic Enterprises of the National Peace Corps Association and in conjunction with Peter Hart Research. During our 50th anniversary year and last September, I think the date's on the cover there, the Peter Hart Research survey surveyed more than 11,000 returned volunteers across the nation. And it was a demographically representative sample of 200,000 returned volunteers. That survey, titled Called Peace, provides a statistically significant summary of the perspective of returned volunteers. Second slide. The key element of Peace Corps' legacy in 50 years is the fact that for all 50 years, our 3 goals have remained the same identical objectives articulated first by Sergeant Schreiber, helping the people in developing countries meet their need for trained men and women, helping promote a better understanding of Americans on the part of the people served, and helping promote better understanding of other peoples on the part of the Americans. Next one. According to thousands of returned volunteers surveyed, major impacts of Peace Corps have been from our second and third objectives. 82% of these returned volunteers said their service had been effective in promoting a better understanding of Americans in the communities where they serve. And 93% said that the Peace Corps had significantly improved the perception of the United States globally. 79% rated their service as effective in helping promote a better understanding of other peoples on the part of Americans. Next. But beyond our three goals, how do we turn Peace Corps volunteers to look back on their service? 90% of returned volunteers said their experience was excellent or very good, and 98% said they would recommend it to their child, grandchild, or other relative. So interestingly, even those 8% that didn't think the experience was so great for them personally would recommend it to their child or another close relative. A living example of this is our current Deputy Director, Carrie Hessler, whose family now has 4 generations of returned volunteers. Next slide. Finally, and most importantly, 92% said Peace Corps had changed their lives, and 89% said that it gave them a new perspective on the role of the United States in the world. Over 60% noted that it had influenced their career choices, and more than half said that it has led them to regularly volunteer in local communities today, which is about double the national rate of volunteering. So I think these are good, solid data that do illustrate the transformative nature of the Peace Corps service. And these statistics, I think, also illustrate an important truth about service. Service is not just about a defined period in your life when you go off to serve and then you stop. Service is a way of looking at the world. It's a mindset, and you've heard wonderful examples of that from our other speakers today. You don't have to go halfway around the world to make a difference in someone's life. Peace Corps is just one of many possibilities. Perhaps the best one, but possibly not. So whatever field you ultimately choose in your career, whatever line or lines of work that you go into, you can always find multiple ways to serve and help others. And when you start your career, the mindset of service will guide you even when you change careers, which virtually all of you will do. It's a mindset you can carry into government and politics, asking yourself how to best lift the lives of those you represent. You can carry it into education, teaching, asking how many young people you can help develop into responsible, productive adults. Carry it into a business career, asking yourself how to deliver a useful, good service while simultaneously serving your shareholders and our society. And it's a mindset you can bring to a nonprofit that you join, or even one that you create and build into a larger organization. So if you will let the call to service inhabit your imagination, your mind as well as your heart, it will guide you well for the rest of your life, and all the rest of us will be better off because you did. Let me just leave today with a quote from the man I mentioned, the hero and role model when I was your age, Peace Corps' guiding light, founding director, Sergeant Schreiber. When Sarge was about my age, maybe even a little older, he addressed the graduating class of his own alma mater, and he said in his inimitable bullion style, "Break your mirrors, yes indeed, shatter the glass. In our society that is so self-absorbed, begin to look less at yourself and more at each other. Learn more about the face of your neighbor and less about your own. So when you get to be 30, 40, 50, or even 70, you'll get more happiness and contentment out of counting your friends than out of counting your dollars. You'll get more satisfaction for having improved your neighborhood, your town, your state, your country, and your fellow human beings than you'll ever get from improving your muscles, your figure, your automobile, your your house or your credit rating. We get more from being a peacemaker than being a warrior, and I've been both. So I speak from experience. Go and break your barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, I have a question, but I already see you get into that.
Hi, my name is Kelly McDonald. I'm actually North American, so I guess a lot of what has been said here might not be directly relevant for me and sort of this community. But my question centers around privilege. Mr. McCarthy characterized this as having one birth lottery, and with that lottery there must be responsibility given. There is nothing more distasteful than having it to be a child. The example that springs to mind is $1,000 ballots, sending money to Sierra Leone after these, where the diamond sourced from the period of that same conflict in that same country. And on the ground service also, this arrogance and privilege can also be detrimental. Someone may think that teaching English in India, for example, is a no-brainer, and yet there are politics of language at play which promise to retrench English as the sole power. We are also treated differently in other countries, both in service and peace work. This creates features between foreigners and locals, and arguably a rogue social factor, and the foreign government is actively priority. So how do you advise us to think about when we meet our privilege and doing international work, so as not to retrench existing divides and commit for cultural imperialism?
Between the acoustics and the silent, I'm not sure I got this first sense of the.
I was having difficulty hearing, and it was a siren. You want to just maybe sum it up?
Right. I mean, the crux of my question was, how do you advise us to think about and mute our privilege when doing international work, so as not to retrench existing divides between foreigners and locals, and commit for cultural imperialism in terms of taking on values to another country and having sort of arrogance and ignorance of doing service work?
So how to bridge the gap from the kind of privileged backgrounds from which we come when we go overseas and serve with people that have not had the kinds of privileges and good fortune that we've had. Is that the sense of it? Just something. I'm sorry. Right?
And it's just a mindset in general.
Yeah.
Mindset of arrogance that kind of comes with having one background.
Yeah. You know, Sergeant Schreiber was truly a brilliant man in this regard. He really, actually, was a very spiritual man, very religious himself, and he translated his values and compassion and service into some important rules that actually made their way into the way the Peace Corps tries to prepare people to go overseas. And one of those actually was the requirement of a lengthy period of time. I mean, it's very true that it is difficult to bridge those gaps. The cultural differences, the language differences, the differences in income and the kinds of living that you're used to having. And you really, I mean, it is true, really, that for the first year of service, it's a very difficult process, and that's when we have some folks who return home, unable to sort of make that adjustment. But the idea is that you will stay and you will live at the level of your neighbors and at the level of the local people, eat their food, talk to them, teach them, interact with them, and get to know them as equals. And that you'll be there a long enough time so you do all this in their language, not yours. And that you get to really, ultimately, over the period of time that you're there, bridge that type of gap so that you gain their trust and their confidence. It takes a long time to do that. And it's true. The first year is, frankly, very steep learning curve, very high learning requirement. But by the second year, most volunteers are really able to deal very effectively with their, when you go out and to visit volunteers now in some of these towns. Did a town in Morocco and visited a young woman from this area who took us around, and she was a youth development volunteer, and she spoke to them not in French, actually not in Arabic, but in the Berber language of the town there. And they just loved her, and she had clearly made that connection and overcome the kinds of differences and disparities, the differences in nationalities and cultures and wealth that I think you were referring to. I hope I've answered your question.
I've heard this.
Thank you.
I know Coleman had a question, not a young lady.
Yes.
I might be able to project, but I'll wait on the mic. Thank you, Jeff. Hi, it was an excellent talk. My question, it could go a touch beyond the scope of the leadership, but when you talk about the Peace Corps and whether or not a country is going to accept volunteers, I'm curious about the dynamics there. I imagine it's highly politicized, but are there other elements that could be telling to the overall idea of service work and leadership when it comes to whether or not U.S. Peace Corps members will be accepted to do service work in a country?
Yes, there is. If I understand your question, it's important for people who apply to volunteers, and actually right next to you, I think there's Steve Chapman from our recruitment office, who can give any of you who are interested in chapter and verse the kinds of qualities and attributes, the kinds of experience we look for in volunteers. From the country's perspective, I think it is really primarily the desire to increase their capacity of their people. Whether it's teaching English in countries with very, very wide demand for that, given the fact that English is now pretty much the language of international commerce and trade and investment and tourism. Whether it is beefing up their education system in Africa in particular, we have large numbers of science and math teachers, which are essentially non-existent in many African countries even today. It may be other things. It needs youth development, I mentioned before. It's certainly today one of the most severe problems being faced by Tunisia. That was one of the reasons they invited us back, youth development and English as a foreign language. I think most of the invitations that come from most countries are where the government has a desire to modernize and to upgrade and to serve the people that are less advantaged in their country. And Peace Corps volunteers can provide a way of multiplying their own efforts to do that. That's really where most of the requests come from. Did I get your question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stacy, on all those percentages over there, you're very impressive. There was one percentage that was left out, and that is the percentage of volunteers who meet their husbands and wives. So how do you feel about working for the only federal government that runs a dating service?
Boy, I didn't expect that question, but we feel pretty good about it. It's true. There are quite a few Peace Corps marriages that happen between volunteers, and actually quite a few that happen between a volunteer and someone from the country's service, even from their village. We certainly don't discourage that, but we try to make sure people stay focused on the primary reasons for being there. And it really has been a benefit. Actually, we have a couple married couples who are working for us, who are volunteers, met in the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps work for us as staff down in Washington. Judy, if I could take 1 second to comment on your first observation, which was also my first observation sitting up there, which was the large predominance of females in the audience. Our Peace Corps is also predominantly female now. When I was in the Peace Corps, it was probably 2/3 male, maybe 70% even in the early days. Today, it is more than 60% female, and so congratulations to you. Thank you. But I want to make a pitch even things out and recruit more males. All of you have a brother, a classmate, a friend, a person, a boyfriend, fiance, someone who means a lot to you, who's a male. And as committed as you all are to service, I urge you to talk to them, please. Help us recruit more males into the Peace Corps. We rely heavily on our former volunteers to help staff us. Our staff now at work is predominantly female, about 58%, and that's all a good thing. It's had a wonderful impact on the Peace Corps.